Chosen one, you may believe you stumbled across these words, but something deeper brought you here. Out of all the directions your attention could have traveled today, it settled in this moment for a reason. There is a sense that something greater saw the widening distance between the life you are living and the life you were created for, and decided that this separation could not continue unnoticed. The urgency behind this message does not come from judgment, it comes from care. Imagine the concern of a father who has watched a struggle unfold for far too long and finally steps forward because the time has come for understanding. What has been happening to you has carried consequences, yet it has never been the story of personal failure. There is a difference between falling short and being held back, and that difference changes everything once it is understood. The answer connected to that difference is far more specific than another comforting explanation or passing encouragement. Every year of effort that seemed to disappear into silence, every prayer that appeared unanswered, every morning that began with the same unresolved distance between where you stood and where you believed you were meant to be, none of it has gone unseen. There is a reason you are hearing this now. Stay with me and give this moment your full attention if you can. What is about to be named has been operating beneath the surface of your life for longer than you realize, and understanding it is where change begins. Some people can hear a message like this and move on without feeling anything at all. Then there are people like you, people who have carried a weight that is difficult to explain to anyone who has never felt it themselves. You have shown up faithfully, given your best repeatedly, and watched the results fall far short of what that level of commitment should have produced. Beneath all your effort, there has been a quiet question that never fully disappeared. Maybe you know that question well. Why does the distance remain after everything you have invested? Why does the life you sense within you still feel separated from the life you are actually living? This message is for the people who have asked those questions in the quiet hours. It is for those who have spent years trying to make sense of something they could feel but could never fully explain. You have learned how to live around the problem. You have given it spiritual meanings, seasonal explanations, and practical adjustments, hoping one of them would finally close the gap. Yet the shape of the experience remained unchanged. So let us speak about it honestly. There has been an invisible ceiling over certain areas of your life, one that appears precisely when momentum begins to build. You start making progress and something interrupts it. You begin gaining traction, and somehow the structure collapses before it can fully support what is growing. The pattern repeats so consistently that it stops feeling random and starts feeling intentional, almost as though an unseen limit follows wherever you go. It is that strange experience of getting close enough to see the breakthrough, only to watch it move just out of reach again. That ceiling is not a reflection of weak faith, and it is not evidence that something is wrong with your character. There is a deeper cause behind it, and understanding that cause matters. The frustration you have carried, the confusion, even the exhaustion, all point towards something that has been quietly influencing your life for a long time. Today is about bringing that hidden influence into the light. There is also a kind of weariness you may recognize immediately. It is deeper than physical fatigue and often remains even after rest. It feels as though tremendous energy has been poured into moving forward, yet the results arriving on the other side seem disproportionately small. It is the exhaustion of pushing against resistance for so long that effort itself begins to feel heavier than it should. That tiredness does not speak of weakness. It reflects what happens when something designed for greater capacity has been operating below its intended level for years. You have invested more than many people ever will, yet the outcomes have often failed to mirror the depth of that investment. The imbalance has left questions that ordinary explanations have never fully answered. You have believed when others would have stopped believing. You have remained committed through seasons that appeared to offer little evidence that your faith was producing anything at all. Opportunities seemed ready to open and then shifted at the last moment. Doors appeared within reach and then closed before you could walk through them, leaving you wondering why your timing never seemed to match your effort. One of the hardest parts has been knowing. Deep inside, you often sense things before they unfold. You recognize patterns, perceive possibilities, and understand situations with a depth that surprises even you. This awareness has followed you for years, and it has earned your trust because it has proven itself again and again. Yet knowing has not always become arriving. Insight appears, clarity comes, and somewhere between understanding and manifestation, the energy seems to fade away. What you see so clearly inside yourself does not fully materialize in the world around you. For someone carrying this level of awareness, that gap can become one of the most painful experiences imaginable. The pain is not created by failure. It comes from feeling the distance between what you were designed to express and what you have actually been able to access. You sense there is more within you than what has reached the surface. And somewhere between the vision you carry and the life you have been able to build, a disconnect has remained waiting to be understood. Chosen one, there is a place inside every person where understanding exists long before results appear. It is the space where insight waits to become action, where what you know must connect with what you are able to create. When that connection is interrupted, the awareness remains alive within you, clear and undeniable, yet unable to fully take shape in the world around you. The knowledge is still there, but the pathway that allows it to become something tangible feels out of reach. You have carried that awareness for a long time. Deep down, you have sensed things that others could not yet see, and you have held convictions that felt real long before there was visible evidence to support them. Yet somewhere between knowing and becoming, something has continued to create distance. It has felt as though you were standing on one side of a bridge, able to see where you were meant to go, while never fully reaching the other side. Then there is that familiar question that greets you before the day has even begun. Sometimes it arrives as a thought, and sometimes it is only a feeling resting quietly beneath the surface. In those early moments before responsibilities and distractions take over, you become aware of a gap that is difficult to explain. It feels as though a part of you recognizes the person you are meant to be, while also recognizing that you have not yet fully stepped into that version of yourself. You have reached toward that life with sincerity. You have shown up again and again, bringing your faith, your effort, your patience, and your determination. Yet despite everything you have invested, the distance has remained, and the reason for it has never become clear. That lingering uncertainty has followed you through seasons that should have produced more than they seem to give back. Everything you have felt is real. Chosen one, the frustration is real, the questions are real. The sense that something deeper has been influencing your experience is real as well. These are not signs of weakness or evidence that you somehow lacked what was required. They are signals pointing towards something operating beneath the surface, beyond the reach of ordinary effort alone. And that deeper cause has a name. Before we get there, though, it is important to revisit some of the explanations you may have been given over the years, because many of them contain a piece of the truth without containing the whole truth. Partial explanations can keep a person moving in circles for years, directing energy towards solutions that never touch the actual source of the problem. Meanwhile, the real cause remains hidden beneath layer after layer of sincere effort. Perhaps you have been told that this is simply a season of preparation. You may have heard that you are in a wilderness chapter, a place where unseen growth is taking place and where God is shaping you for something greater ahead. There is truth in that perspective. Seasons of formation are real, and there are moments in life when growth happens beneath the surface long before it becomes visible. Yet preparation was never meant to last forever. Every season carries an ending within it, just as every beginning carries the seed of what comes next. If the entire explanation were simply timing, you would expect to see at least some lasting evidence of movement by now. Somewhere, in some area of your life, the pattern would have shifted in a way that clearly reflected the effort you have invested. You may also have been told that the answer was greater discipline. Pray more, study more, wake earlier, stay more consistent, become more focused. So you tried. You added new routines, strengthened your habits, and committed yourself with even greater determination, believing that the missing breakthrough might be waiting on the other side of one more adjustment. But the distance remained. The harder you worked, the more you began questioning yourself, wondering whether you simply had not done enough yet. Over time, that belief became its own burden. It convinced you to keep applying pressure to an area that was never the true source of the problem, while the deeper issue remained untouched beneath all the effort. Others pointed to your environment. They suggested it was the people around you, the atmosphere you lived in, the relationships that drained your energy instead of restoring it. So you made changes, you created boundaries, protected your peace, and moved toward healthier spaces. Yet even after those changes, the same ceiling seemed to follow you. Eventually, you may have started wondering whether the issue was something you carried within yourself, something that remained present, no matter where you went or what you changed around you. But Chosen One, none of those explanations fully account for what you have experienced. They each touch a part of the story, yet the deeper answer exists beneath all of them. The truth is both simpler and older than you may expect. There is something that gradually faded from your life long before you began searching for answers. It was not lost recently, and it was not taken during a single difficult season. The process began so early and so quietly that most people never realize it happened at all. Its absence has influenced more than you know. It has shaped the recurring delays, the disconnect between effort and outcome, the questions that surface in the quiet hours, and the feeling that something essential has remained just beyond reach. For years, it has quietly influenced experiences that seemed unrelated on the surface, but were connected underneath. And here is the part I want you to hold on to. What was diminished can be restored. There are researchers who devoted decades to studying this exact mechanism, searching for an explanation that could account for the patterns so many people experience without understanding. What they discovered was surprisingly simple in practice, even though the science behind it stretches back generations. Before this message ends, I will show you what they found and why it matters. But sit with this possibility for a moment. What if the gap was never created by a lack of faith, a flaw in your character, or a failure of discipline? What if the source of the struggle existed at a deeper level, in the very place where your ability to think, create, build, and express your potential begins? Let that question settle inside you. Give yourself a moment to consider it honestly. Because what you were born with was extraordinary in a very real sense. From the beginning, you carried the full potential of a mind designed to operate in harmony, with every part working together as it was created to do. When you were a child, you moved through the world with a kind of mental freedom that most adults no longer remember having. Ideas came easily, curiosity felt natural, and your ability to imagine, learn, and connect things often seemed effortless. The change did not happen all at once. It happened so gradually, and to so many people, that most adults never stop to question what may have quietly faded along the way. There is research that rarely finds its way into everyday conversations, and for many people, it is something they have never encountered at all. Decades of scientific study explored how the two hemispheres of the brain function, both separately and together. What researchers discovered was that when these two sides operate in true harmony, something remarkable emerges that neither side can fully produce on its own. The mind begins functioning as a more complete and integrated system. In that state, creativity and logic stop competing and start working together. Intuition gains structure, analysis gains depth, and insights become easier to recognize and apply. Connections that once seemed hidden begin to reveal themselves more clearly. The mind becomes capable of seeing patterns, possibilities, and solutions with a level of clarity that feels fundamentally different from fragmented thinking. Researchers describe this as a state of whole brain functioning, a condition where the mind operates closer to its intended design. It was never presented as a rare gift reserved for a select few. Instead, it reflected a natural capacity available within human beings from the very beginning. What makes this idea so striking is the suggestion that many young children naturally function this way before life gradually pulls them away from it. Think back to the way a child approaches the world. There is wonder, openness, and an eagerness to explore possibilities without the limitations adults often place on themselves. Questions flow freely, imagination works alongside reason, and learning feels alive. The capacity that existed then carried a kind of wholeness that many people spend years trying to rediscover without realizing what they are searching for. The loss of that connection is often blamed on growing older, but the story may be more complicated than that. Life introduces pressure, urgency, responsibilities, and constant demands for attention. Systems designed around performance can gradually prioritize certain ways of thinking while leaving other capacities underused. Over time, many people become so focused on surviving and keeping up that the deeper integration they once possessed quietly slips into the background. Years of noise have a way of pulling the mind in different directions. Endless responsibilities, constant stimulation, and the pressure to keep moving can leave very little room for inner alignment. Eventually, parts of ourselves that once worked together begin operating in isolation. What once felt natural starts to feel distant, and many people spend years sensing that something important has gone missing without knowing exactly what it is. I want to place this idea beside a story you may already know. Esther's life appeared from every visible perspective to be marked by disadvantage. She was an orphan, living within circumstances she did not choose, positioned in an environment that seemed far removed from the future she was ultimately called to step into. From the outside, her story looked delayed, uncertain, and restricted by forces beyond her control. Yet when her story is viewed through a wider lens, something very different emerges. What appeared to be limitation was actually positioning. What looked like delay carried purpose hidden beneath the surface. The circumstances that seemed to place her behind were quietly preparing her for a moment that required exactly who she was becoming. That is why her story continues to resonate with so many people. There are seasons that make little sense while you are living through them. There are stretches of time when progress feels invisible and nothing appears to be moving. Yet when the right moment arrives, years of preparation can suddenly reveal their meaning in ways that no amount of striving could have forced into existence. The capacity Esther needed was already within her long before her moment arrived. It did not appear at the last second. It was developed, shaped, and carried through every season that seemed insignificant from the outside. When the opportunity finally came, she stepped into something she had unknowingly been preparing for all along. There is an ancient idea I want you to hold close. It is the understanding that arriving later does not mean arriving wrongly. Some moments unfold only after a larger sequence has completed its work. What appears delayed from one perspective can be perfectly timed from another. That perspective changes everything. It transforms the story from one of failure into one of formation. It reminds you that the person who arrives later is not necessarily the person who missed the path. Sometimes they are the very person the path was preparing for from the beginning. And perhaps that is why this message matters so much. The process unfolding in your life may be carrying more meaning than you have been able to see. What feels unfinished may still be moving toward completion. What feels distant may still be drawing closer with every step, even when the movement is hidden from view. Before I show you the path being presented here, I want you to stay with this thought a little longer. You have spent years living with patterns that seemed impossible to explain. The recurring delays, the exhaustion that went deeper than rest could solve, the awareness that there was more inside you than what was reaching the surface. These experiences have followed you for a long time. Now, a different possibility is being placed before you. What if those experiences were connected to a capacity you once carried more naturally than you do today? What if the disconnect you have been feeling is tied to something that slowly diminished over the course of your life rather than something you consciously chose? The possibility being offered is that what feels lost was never completely gone, only suppressed beneath years of conditioning, pressure, and adaptation. And if that is true, then the story changes. The struggle becomes easier to understand, the patterns begin to make sense, and the question shifts from why this happened to whether restoration is possible. That is the answer this message is moving toward, and it is why what comes next matters. So if that explains the reason, then the next question naturally follows. What can actually be done about it? According to the explanation being shared here, Dr. Daniel Barron, a neurologist based in New York, spent years building upon earlier discoveries surrounding brain synchronization and eventually developed a process his team refers to as neural synchronization. The concept is surprisingly simple in practice. It involves listening to a carefully engineered 8-minute audio sequence through headphones designed to help both hemispheres of the brain communicate and function together more effectively. There is no complicated learning curve, no expensive machinery filling a room, and no months of intensive training. The appeal lies in its simplicity and accessibility. This message is especially aimed at people who have spent years feeling as though they were standing just outside the life they were meant to live. People who have worked hard, remained faithful, and continued showing up, yet still carried the quiet feeling that something essential was missing. It speaks to those who sense untapped potential within themselves, a deeper level of clarity, creativity, or capability that has never fully surfaced. The promise being made is not simply about becoming more productive. It is about reconnecting with capacities that once felt natural and effortless, but gradually became harder to access over time. To make that possibility feel more tangible, the story introduces a woman from Manhattan who believed she was living inside a pattern that stretched back through generations. She had watched people in her family invest enormous effort into their lives, only to experience setbacks that seemed strangely repetitive. Her grandfather built something meaningful and lost it. Her father dedicated decades to his career and still encountered disappointment at the moment success appeared closest. As the years passed, she began to see similar patterns unfolding in her own life, despite her determination to create a different outcome. Eventually, she encountered the work being described and decided to try it for herself. She was not overflowing with certainty when she began. In fact, she approached it with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious hope. Yet according to her experience, something began shifting within the first week. The change was subtle enough that she struggled to describe it, but significant enough that she could not ignore it. By the end of the second week, she reported not only a promotion she had previously been passed over for, but also a level of mental clarity she had not experienced since childhood. What seemed most meaningful to her was not the promotion itself. It was the feeling that accompanied it. She described it as though an invisible weight had finally lifted, a barrier she had carried for so long that she had almost mistaken it for part of her identity. The change felt less like luck arriving and more like reconnecting with a forgotten part of herself. In her own words, the pattern that once felt permanent no longer appeared to have the same authority over her life. The explanation then returns to the broader research behind the idea. It emphasizes the belief that many children naturally operate with a level of mental integration that becomes increasingly uncommon as they move into adulthood. Over time, stress, responsibility, conditioning, and the constant demands of modern life can pull people further away from that state. Rather than accepting this as an unavoidable consequence of getting older, the message suggests that some of those lost capacities may still be recoverable. The entire premise rests on the possibility that what feels gone may actually be dormant. For those who have explored other personal development tools, meditation apps, sound programs, or self-improvement systems without experiencing meaningful change, an important distinction is introduced. The claim being made is that many approaches focus on isolated effects rather than true cooperation between both sides of the brain. According to this perspective, lasting change comes when different cognitive functions begin working together instead of operating independently. The emphasis is placed on integration rather than stimulation alone. In that sense, the proposed solution is presented as addressing the root mechanism rather than the surface symptoms. The argument is that many people spend years trying to improve outcomes while never addressing the deeper process influencing those outcomes in the first place. The difference, according to this narrative, is the difference between working harder and working from a more complete version of yourself. It is the difference between adding more effort and restoring access to capacity that was already there. The process itself is described in the simplest possible terms. Put on a pair of headphones, close your eyes, listen for 8 minutes. There are no elaborate rituals, no affirmations that must be memorized, and no techniques requiring months of practice. The experience is designed to be straightforward enough that anyone can begin immediately. The promise is that the audio sequence provides a signal intended to help the brain reconnect with abilities that have remained dormant beneath years of pressure, adaptation, and mental fragmentation. The offer is then compared with alternatives that often require a much larger financial commitment. Neurofeedback sessions can cost hundreds of dollars per appointment. Specialized equipment can reach into the thousands. Against that backdrop, this program is positioned as a far more accessible entry point for people who want to explore the concept without making a major investment. Additional resources focused on visualization, daily habits, and personal growth are also included as part of the offer. Another important part of the presentation is the guarantee. The listener is repeatedly encouraged to evaluate the experience for themselves rather than relying solely on claims or promises. The emphasis is placed on personal experimentation and direct observation. The message is clear: give it a genuine opportunity, pay attention to your own experience, and decide based on what you discover. That approach creates a sense of openness rather than demanding unquestioning belief. A note of caution is included as well. Viewers are warned that similar products and recordings exist online, many of which use similar language without following the same methodology. Because of that, the recommendation is to access the original source through the description and pinned comment. Within the context of the message, that is presented as the most reliable place to explore the work being discussed. And then something interesting happens. The focus shifts away from the research, the technology, and even the offer itself. The attention returns to the person listening. It returns to the individual who has spent years carrying unanswered questions, unexplained disappointments, and the persistent feeling that life should have unfolded differently than it did. The conversation becomes personal again. Chosen one, perhaps the deepest frustration has never been about success alone. Perhaps it has been about potential. You sensed there was more inside you long before anyone else recognized it. There were moments when you caught glimpses of who you could become, moments when clarity appeared so vividly that it felt almost tangible. Yet somehow that version of yourself always seemed slightly out of reach, as though an invisible distance remained between vision and reality. That distance can become painful over time, not because you stop believing in what is possible, but because you continue believing while seeing so little evidence of movement. You keep showing up. You keep investing energy. You keep hoping. And yet part of you quietly wonders why the life you are building never seems to fully reflect the person you know exists within you. But hear this clearly. The struggle was never evidence that you lacked value. The exhaustion was never proof that you were weak. The delays were never confirmation that something was fundamentally wrong with you. The effort you invested was real, and so was the frustration that followed when the results failed to match that effort. The gap is real. The questions are real. The sense that something has been limiting your ability to fully express your potential is real as well. Yet the central message being offered here is that there has always been a reason beneath those experiences. What you have been feeling was not a warning that you were broken. It was the awareness of a separation between the life you were living and the fuller version of yourself you knew was possible. And according to the story being told here, that separation has a cause that may finally be coming into view. The message being offered here is that the distance you have felt was never created because you lacked value or potential. It grew within a world that often rewarded survival over wholeness and demanded so much of people that they slowly lost touch with parts of themselves they once carried naturally. Through all of it, every disappointment, every closed opportunity, and every season that seemed to yield nothing visible, you were seen. Every time you chose to keep moving forward when the evidence around you suggested otherwise, that choice mattered more than you realized. There is a comforting thought woven through this message. It suggests that your story has never been measured by missed opportunities or unfinished outcomes. Instead, it has been measured by your willingness to continue, by the quiet persistence that carried you through seasons where answers seemed absent. The focus shifts away from failure and toward faithfulness, away from outcomes and toward the strength it took to keep showing up. And perhaps this is the truth many people need to hear. What looked like delay may not have been delay in the way you interpreted it. There are seasons that feel wasted while you are living through them, only to reveal later that they were shaping capacities you could not yet see. What appeared to be closed doors may have been redirecting you towards something that required a different version of yourself than the one you were at the time. You have spent years becoming someone, not standing still, not falling behind. Becoming. The person emerging from difficult seasons is rarely identical to the person who entered them. Life has a way of refining qualities that comfort never could, and many of the strengths you carry now were born in places you once wished you could escape. That is why the image of the phoenix resonates so deeply here. The transformation is not simply about surviving hardship, it is about allowing hardship to reveal something that could not have emerged any other way. What rises from the fire carries wisdom, perspective, endurance, and depth that did not exist before the fire began its work. When you look back over the years that felt confusing, there is a possibility that something more meaningful was happening beneath the surface. The disappointments, the repeated setbacks, the mornings filled with unanswered questions, all of them may have been shaping a version of you uniquely prepared for what comes next. The person standing at the threshold today is not a delayed version of who you were meant to be. The person standing here now is the result of everything those years were building. The message then becomes even more personal. It suggests that you may be someone capable of changing patterns that existed long before you arrived. Many people inherit ways of thinking, responding, and interpreting life without ever realizing it. They carry those patterns forward because they never had language for them, never understood them, and never knew another way was possible. You, however, are being invited to see yourself differently. You are being invited to believe that understanding creates change, and that what you restore within yourself has the potential to influence others who follow after you. Whether that influence touches family, friends, or future generations, the idea is the same. Awareness breaks cycles that once seemed permanent. There is also a reason this message keeps returning to your voice. Not necessarily your literal voice, but the wisdom gained from lived experience. People tend to trust those who have walked through the same valleys they are still trying to navigate. The language that comes from personal experience carries a weight that theory alone can never replicate. You have lived with questions that many others silently carry. You know what it feels like to invest deeply and wonder why the results never seem to match the effort. You understand the frustration of sensing greater potential while feeling unable to fully access it. Because of that, your story speaks in ways that simple advice never could. You are allowed to release the shame attached to the timeline you expected for your life. You are allowed to stop measuring your worth against what should have happened by now. The years that felt slow, confusing, or unproductive do not have to remain evidence against you. They can become part of a larger story that reveals how much was being built beneath the surface all along. You are also allowed to begin again without carrying every disappointment into the future. There comes a point when the weight of old expectations no longer serves the person you are becoming. The invitation here is to step forward without dragging every past frustration behind you, trusting that a new season does not require permission from the old one to begin. To reinforce that possibility, another story is offered. A man spent more than a decade committed to work he genuinely believed he was called to do. He watched others receive recognition while his own efforts seemed to produce only modest results. Over time, the gap between his dedication and his visible progress became increasingly difficult to understand. Yet he continued showing up. He continued believing even when belief no longer felt rewarded by what he could see around him. Eventually, he explored the approach described earlier, committing to it with a mixture of hope and skepticism. What he described afterward was not a dramatic overnight transformation, but a gradual return of mental clarity that had been absent for so long he had forgotten what it felt like. He spoke about reconnecting with a level of focus and alertness he remembered from much earlier in life. Thoughts seemed to flow together more naturally, ideas connected more easily, and work that once felt difficult began moving with greater ease. According to his experience, the breakthrough came because the capacity behind the work changed before the circumstances around the work changed. One statement from his story carries particular emotional weight. He said he spent years searching for the source of the problem somewhere outside himself, only to discover that the answer involved something happening within. That realization shifted the way he understood his entire journey. What he once interpreted as external resistance began to look different when viewed through a new lens, and the message closes this section by returning once more to possibility. It suggests that what awaits you is not vague or undefined, but something real, something already prepared and waiting to be stepped into. The reason it may have felt distant is not because it disappeared or moved beyond reach. The explanation being offered is that the capacity needed to fully meet it has been operating below its intended level for much of your life. And that understanding this may be the beginning of seeing your story in an entirely new way. Chosen one, before you think about what comes next, before you make a decision or try to piece everything together, take a moment and simply breathe. Take the kind of breath that comes when something you've carried for years finally begins to make sense. Let yourself sit quietly with what you have heard. There is no race in this moment, no need to rush toward an answer, only the invitation to allow truth to settle into places that have been waiting for it for a very long time. Sometimes the most important thing is not learning something new, but finally seeing your own story through a different lens. So let these words rest for a moment. Let them move beyond information and become understanding. Let yourself consider the possibility that the years you thought were lost were still serving a purpose, even when you could not see it. The delays were real, but they were never declarations about your worth. The closed doors were real, but they were never final judgments about your future. The distance between where you stood and where you believed you were meant to be may have felt enormous at times, but that distance never had the authority to define who you are. It was part of your experience, but it was never your identity. There were seasons when you kept moving forward without evidence, seasons when your faith was being spent daily and very little seemed to come back in return. You continued showing up, continued believing, continued reaching, even when the visible world offered almost nothing to encourage you. That kind of persistence is not ordinary. It reveals something about the strength that has been quietly growing inside you all along. Many people would have stopped long ago. Many people would have allowed disappointment to become their final conclusion. Yet something within you kept looking toward tomorrow. Even when hope felt fragile, you protected it. Even when answers seemed distant, you continued searching. Even when exhaustion settled deep into your spirit, some part of you refused to let go completely. And that matters more than you realize. There is a reason this message keeps returning to the hidden places of your life. So much of what shaped you happened where nobody else could see it. The private battles, the unanswered questions, the moments when you sat alone trying to understand why things seemed harder than they should have been. The mornings when you woke up carrying a weight you could not fully explain to anyone around you. Those experiences were real. The frustration was real. The feeling that something was limiting your ability to fully step into your potential was real. You were not imagining it, and you were not exaggerating it. The struggle carried a reality to it because something beneath the surface was asking to be understood. For years, you may have blamed yourself for things that were never truly yours to carry. You may have questioned your discipline, your faith, your consistency, or your worth. You may have looked at your life and wondered why your efforts seemed unable to produce the same results you saw in others. Those questions leave marks on a person. They create doubts that can follow someone for years. Yet the message being offered here asks you to consider a different perspective. What if the struggle was never proof that you were inadequate? What if the symptoms were pointing toward a cause that had never been properly identified? What if the exhaustion, the delays, and the recurring ceilings were signs that something deeper needed attention rather than evidence that you were somehow falling short? That possibility changes the emotional weight of the entire story. Because if the cause is real, then restoration can be real as well. If something has been operating below its intended capacity, then improvement becomes possible. If something has been suppressed, then it can be reawakened. And if there is a path toward greater alignment, then the future no longer has to look exactly like the past. The purpose you sensed inside yourself never disappeared. It survived every setback. It survived every restart. It survived every season where you questioned whether you were still moving in the right direction. It remained present through years that looked unproductive from the outside because its existence was never dependent on visible progress. What is meant for you does not disappear simply because the journey takes longer than expected, and perhaps that is what you need to hear most clearly right now. The future you have been reaching toward was never waiting for a flawless version of you. It was never waiting for someone without scars, without disappointments, or without questions. It was waiting for the version of you that would emerge from experience carrying wisdom, resilience, compassion, and understanding. The version of you standing here today has survived things the younger version of you could not have imagined. You have learned lessons that only time could teach. You have developed endurance that could only be formed through challenge. You have become someone capable of carrying more because life required you to grow into that capacity. Think for a moment about the child you once were. Think about the curiosity, imagination, wonder, and openness that came so naturally. Think about how easily possibilities seemed to exist before the world taught you to doubt them. The message suggests that those qualities were never erased. They may have been buried beneath responsibilities, stress, expectations, and years of adaptation, but they were never completely gone. Something within you has always remained intact. And maybe that is why these words resonate. Maybe some deeper part of you recognizes the possibility that more still exists within you than what has been expressed so far. Maybe part of you has always known that the story was unfinished. Maybe that quiet knowing is what kept you moving forward through every season when giving up seemed easier. That same persistence has carried you to this moment. Every time you started over, it was there. Every time you prayed through exhaustion, it was there. Every time you chose to continue despite disappointment, it was there. The thread running through your story has never been failure. The thread running through your story has been faithfulness. And now the invitation remains in front of you. The information shared throughout this message points toward a specific resource and a specific path. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. That is where you can learn more about the work that has been discussed and explore the 8-minute sequence for yourself. Take this moment seriously, not because it demands urgency, but because meaningful change often begins quietly. The decisions that reshape a life rarely arrive with dramatic music or unmistakable signs. More often, they arrive in ordinary moments when someone chooses to remain open to a new possibility. You were never placed in difficult years simply to be diminished by them. The message suggests that those years carried a purpose that was working beneath the surface long before you could recognize it. Many people who eventually step into a new season first spend years walking through terrain that appears confusing, slow, and even unfair from the outside. You have walked through years like that. You have carried the weight. You have asked the questions. You have continued moving forward when the path ahead seemed uncertain. You have spent faith in seasons where very little appeared to come back in return. And through it all, something inside you remained alive enough to keep believing that there had to be more to the story. If you feel called to explore what has been shared, the path being referenced is available through the description and pinned comment. Go there if it feels right for you. Explore it thoughtfully. Give yourself permission to consider the possibility that what has felt permanently closed may simply have been waiting for the right understanding. And as you move forward from this moment, carry one final thought with you. The story is still unfolding. The years behind you do not have the final word. The delays do not have the final word. The ceilings do not have the final word. What matters now is that you continue walking forward with a deeper understanding of what you have carried, what you have survived, and what may finally be ready to awaken. The gap closes.